In this video, we're going to be talking about working with ClearBallistics Ballistics Gel. I want to discuss some of the do's, some of the don'ts, some of the best practices, and how to avoid some of the stupid mistakes like I made when I first got this stuff and didn't know exactly what the best way was to work with it. So, I mean, obviously what we have here, this is a synthetic ballistic gel. It is designed as an alternative to traditional ordnance gelatin, and it has many advantages, which I discuss in the other video that I've posted, which is a comparison of ClearBallistics Gel to traditional ordnance gelatin. As far as working with it goes, the general idea, obviously, is we put it up on a nice stable surface, we point a gun at it, we pull the trigger, it catches the bullet, and then we can then measure and dissect the block and get that. That's great. But there are some things that you should know about it before you get to that point. One of the first lessons is you better have 2 blocks. You really kind of need 2. Unless you have a bullet that's not going to penetrate very far, and even then it may perform differently than you were expecting. I've got one of my videos that explains that. But you need 2 blocks, and here's why. When you first fire a bullet into this gel, it will penetrate a certain distance. Let's take the FBI's goal of 12 inches, so you'd want it to penetrate about here, right? Well, if you watch it in a high-speed, slow-motion camera, you'll see what actually happens. The bullet doesn't just penetrate to this point and stop. It actually does this wonderfully poetic dance here. It will penetrate a lot further initially, and then it will basically bounce off of where it has penetrated to and actually travel backwards through the gel for a while until the ripples, the waves, the shock of the gel catches up with the bullet and pushes it back forward to its final resting point. Now, if you didn't know that, if you just shot it and then measured it, you may not ever know that the bullet was actually going too far and then backwards and then stopping. But when you see it on high speed, you can see that's exactly what it does. So here's the problem. If you only had one block, one 16-inch block, and the bullet you're firing is going to come to rest at 14 inches. Well, it may over-penetrate to 17 or 18 inches before bouncing and heading backwards and then settling down at 14. Well, if it over-penetrates and it comes out the block, bling, it's gone, you lost it, and you will get no results. You will get faulty results if you only had the one block. So definitely put a second block up. Now, traditional ballistics gelatin also performs to some degree to that same way. You can see in high-speed, slow-motion photography, you can see that the bullets will actually over-penetrate a little and bounce back. It seems that it does so more so in the ClearBallistics Gel. And what I want to point out is that after extensive testing, I can verify for you that you don't care how far it over-penetrates. That's not a relevant figure as far as how this compares to traditional ordnance gelatin. What you really want to know is, where does the bullet come to a stop? That's what compares directly to how traditional ordnance gelatin works. So where the bullet stops is what's important. You just want to make sure that it stops in the block. And in order to make sure it stops in the block, you may need to have a second block there to catch in case of any over-penetration, so that it'll push it back into position where it belongs, and then you can get accurate, usable readings from that. Second thing to know about is temperature. The traditional ordnance gelatin, you have to keep it in extremely tightly controlled temperature situations. You want to keep the core of the block no warmer than 41 degrees Fahrenheit. The ClearBallistics Gel doesn't really care all that much. I've shot it at 40 degrees, I've shot it at 88.5 degrees, and it will still calibrate out, which is good. The second thing about this gel that you don't need to worry about is the mixture, the ratio. In traditional ordnance gelatin, you want to keep your mixture at basically 10%. So 1 pound of gelatin powder for 9 pounds of water makes 10 pounds worth of ballistic gel. 2 pounds for a 20-pound block. 2 pounds of gelatin powder and 18 pounds of water makes a 20-pound block. One of the great things about Clear Gel is you don't mix it. You don't care. It's pre-mixed, and it's always the right consistency, the right mixture, because you remelt it as it is. You never have to mix anything. That's great. One thing you do want to be aware of, though, is you want it to be at a consistent, good, solid temperature. So when you melt the block, and you first take it out of the mold, you want to make sure that this has a chance to cool down at least a good 12 to 14 hours. You don't want the center of the block to still be soft and not fully gelled, not fully firmed up. Third thing that we want to discuss about here is sunlight. You can shoot the blocks in full sunlight, that's okay. And like I said, it doesn't really matter what the temperature is. A hot Texas day with 95% humidity and 88 degrees, it was still fine. But if you leave the block in direct sunlight for a lengthy period of time, that will start to soften it up or melt it down. You don't want to do that. I mean, just be reasonable. Put it in the shade. You want it in the shade. As long as you got it in the shade, you don't have to worry about keeping it in a cooler, but you definitely want to keep it in the shade. Once you've shot the block and you get it home, if you want to examine it most clearly, one thing I find pretty useful to do is to what we call polish the block, where you use a hair dryer. And you actually just spend a couple of minutes going over the surface of the block with the hair dryer, and it will really clarify this outer layer of the block and make it transparent so you can really see deep in there. Okay, let's talk about transporting the blocks. Once you've pulled it out of the mold, what do you do with it? First step I do always, wrap it up in some cling wrap, saran wrap, something like that. The reason for this is because whatever this block touches, it's going to stick to. It's going to stick totally. And I like to keep the blocks in the boxes that they came from. You know, this is the ClearBallistics box, and it's kind of beat to crud because I've shot these blocks so many times. But if you put the block directly in the box, it will stick to the box, and it's a royal pain in the patootie to get the block out of that. So don't do that. Keep some saran wrap, keep some cling wrap around your block. Doesn't cost much, and if you keep the cling wrap very, very tight on the block, then it will stay smoother, and you may not need to do that polishing step. You may still have a clear, transparent block. Also, when you get to the shooting range, remove all the saran wrap or cling wrap or whatever it is from the block except from the bottom. Don't put the block down on any surface unless there's a layer of this protective wrapping on there, because it'll stick to whatever. I mean, at my shooting range, there's concrete benches, and if I lay the block on there, it sticks, and it's a little bit of effort to pull that off of there. So another thing is, depending on what you shoot it on, I mean, the first thing I did, I put out some plastic sawhorses and a sheet of particle board, and I put the block right on there, and I shot it, and that was stupid to do, because what ended up happening is when the block gets hit, you know, it moves a little bit, and so it jammed a lot of splinters from that plywood up into the block, and you gotta pick every one of those stupid things out. You don't want this crud in your block ruining the clarity of the block. So I learned real quick, either cover the surface with a tablecloth or something, or put down some saran wrap or cling wrap under the bottom of the block. Just don't let it touch anything dirty. Along those lines, when you're shooting the block, you want to keep a good maybe 10 feet away from the block. Don't get too close to it, because the closer you are, the more likely it is that some unburned gunpowder or other debris from the muzzle flash is going to get embedded in the end of the block. And that's kind of nasty. You don't want that nasty unburnt powder and all that kind of stuff in here. So when you bring the block back, the first thing you should do is wash it off and clean it up and make sure that it's nice and clean. All that stuff that's on the block, you got to get rid of it, because when you remelt the block, it'll stay suspended and floating in that melted solution, and you don't really want that. So clean the block up, and then you've got to make sure it's dry. Dry, 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 dry. Don't let any water get in the mixture. The ClearBallistics guys, in their instructions on remelting, they say to wash it off and then even leave the block out in the sun for a couple of hours to make sure that it's perfectly dry. You don't want any water whatsoever. So make sure you wash it, clean it up. When you get it back here, you polish it with the hairdryer if you want the additional clarity. And then you can measure the bullets and then go in and extract them. Here's another point where it's a little bit different. You can't just reach in, like you'll see guys doing ballistics gel tests where they've got, you know, a long pair of needle nose pliers or something, and they just jam it in there and grab the bullet. It's not going to happen with this stuff. This stuff has much more resistance. I mean, I'm jamming a finger in there, and it's not breaking the surface is still solid. So when you go to get the bullets out, you're going to want to either cut a starting spot with there, or what I typically do is I just find a corner here and tear. As soon as you get it torn, then it's easy. Well, comparatively easy. It still takes effort, but it's relatively easy to pull the block apart and get at the projectiles that are inside. Thanks for watching. Hope you found this helpful, and we will cover reforming and remelting the block in our next video.